Welcome to our program. I'm your host, Patrick Ryan, president of the Tennessee World Affairs Council. We're in our 12th month of war in Ukraine following Russia's unprovoked invasion of its sovereign neighbor. In that time, we witnessed attacks and war crimes against the Ukrainian people, against their cities, transportation infrastructure, the energy grid, ports, and schools. The World Economic Forum said last summer 6.6 million Ukrainians had fled the country, 3.5 million to Poland alone. Of those, 94% were women and children. Today, we will discuss the humanitarian impact on Ukraine of President Vladimir Putin's and Russia's ruthless campaign. I'm pleased to introduce our guest today from Kyiv. We're joined by Anna Novosad, who is former Minister of Education and Science in the Ukraine government. And she's working as an activist, working to restore schools and other facilities for children in areas damaged by the Russian attacks. Anna has a Nashville connection, having participated in the Vanderbilt University Humphreys Fellow Program. It was cut short last year by the invasion and her desire to return to her homeland. We're also joined by Elena Byrd and Dr. Madeleine Byrd in Nashville and Charleston, respectively. This mother-daughter team didn't wait to watch the news about the war in Ukraine. They took off to Warsaw, Poland to aid refugees from Ukraine who sought protection and medical aid in a safe place. Both are Nashvillians. Anna, Elena, and Madeleine, thank you for taking time today to share your insights and experiences.
Thank you for having us.
Let's start in Kyiv with Anna Novosad. Anna, you've been in the middle of Kyiv during the recent waves of Russian missile strikes and around the country to observe conditions in other areas. And I'll mention to our viewers, you're currently in your car because you had to drive to a district in Kyiv that had electrical power for the cell phone towers. And you're joining us in somewhat different circumstances than we normally connect, but we appreciate the difficulty in making the connection from Kyiv, and thank you for being with us. Can you talk to us about what's happening now, what you're experiencing in Kyiv, what's the daily routine there and around the country when you visit other areas? What sorts of things do you see? We know that the campaign has taken many dimensions. The brave Ukrainian forces have made advances in the east, but Russia still pounds many Kyiv cities like Kyiv with missile strikes and against energy grids and other facilities. So give us a sense of what's happening, and then tell us a little bit more about the funding that's been in the news for military equipment from the West. And lastly, we'd like to hear more about your work to restore schools damaged by the Russian attacks.
Oh, thank you very much, Patrick. If I may just ask you to confirm that you hear me well.
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Just to excuse myself for our viewers and listeners, I have to join this Zoom from my car because currently we experienced for the last 3 months quite rough electricity outages after Russia destroyed and keeps destroying our energy grid. So far, around 40% of our energy plants and transmission points are destroyed. So here in Kyiv, we have electricity only for around. Sorry, I have to now switch on my car because light is gone. Yeah, now it's back. So we have electricity only for 12 hours a day, and now it's the time when I don't have it. So my car is the place where I still have it. So about the situation, we met here on this venue in summer, and for Ukraine, I would say for people here in Kyiv, that wasn't house the most sort of horrible battles have been unfolding there, and at some point people maybe even started sort of forgetting that we are in the middle of the war. But then on 10th of October, in the cities like Kyiv and in other a lot of areas that were deemed to be a little bit more peaceful, Russians started massive missile terror. So since 10th of October, every week, it's like by now it's like scheduled, predominantly on Mondays. We have huge missile strikes. So Russians launch roughly 70 to 100 missiles all over the country, including Kyiv, predominantly targeting Kyiv. Infrastructure sites, energy sites, government, everything that might be deemed critical, but not only. Also using a very traditional Russian tactic of just terror of civilians. They are targeting just regular residential houses. Like last Saturday in Dnipro, they hit just a regular 9-story building, and it was gone completely, with tens and tens and tens of people being dead. So since, oh my God, and now air alert is on. Sorry. Today we had it quite a lot of times. But then, and after missile attacks, normally at night come the Iranian drones. This is something that we discovered during this last couple of months when Iran started exporting to Russia its drones. So these are like very cheap solutions that fly under cover of night on a very low height, and it's very hard to detect it. So our anti-missile forces cannot detect it, and you cannot hit it by a missile because missile costs like $10 million, and this drone is $6,000 US worth. So they usually send it like in batches of 60 or 70 or 80. And then because it's so hard to discover it, we have them at night all over the city. And you just hear like police machines or just, people with guns trying to shoot those drones from their windows. So it's insane, to think about that. I never in my life thought that Iranian drones would hunt me in Kyiv and try to kill me, but that's our current reality. The regular life, I think we all somehow adjusted to it, to this lack of electricity, lack of water, lack of mobile connection. And it's not the worst thing, you can adjust to everything. Everyone now sort of has a generator and is trying to hold on. So I wouldn't really complain on my on just a regular life, because it's still bearable in comparison to what people live through in the east or in the occupied parts of South, or in still occupied parts in the Kharkiv region in the north. Since I would say August or end of July, Russia has been trying to completely invade and completely occupy the eastern parts of Ukraine, Donetsk region, Luhansk region, and there is not very large city of Bakhmut. It's a city that before the war, before the full-scale war, had a bit more than 50,000 inhabitants. We now call it the Castle Bakhmut because Russians have been trying to overtake it since August. They still can't do it. The city is completely gone, like hundreds of cities. But for them, it became sort of like a symbol that they have to overcome. And so by now, Russians have mobilized and drafted for the last months as more than 300,000 new soldiers that are already fighting here. And soon, as our intelligence says, they are about to mobilize, as they claim, 2 more million people. So 2 more million Russians we expect over the course of the next year of in our soil. So sort of leads me to answer about the general mood. General mood here is that we are still happy and grateful that we have no electricity, no water, no mobile connection, but we also have no Russians here in Kyiv. and in a lot of cities of Ukraine, and it's a huge part. However, we are all cognizant of the fact that the worst is yet to come. And I think everyone is preparing for the worst. Everyone is preparing for the huge battle in spring, because it's now obvious that Putin will not stop, and just those bits of territories that they still keep are not enough for them. And this newly mobilized, newly drafted waves of Russian soldiers will just come and come and come and come. I have so many friends on the front line in the east, and they say, like, obviously they are better prepared. In many occasions, they have better weapons by now, but there's just endless mass of Russians. So it's basically, if those of you who listen who remember what was happening in the Second World War, it's been General Zhukov and tactic, just to sort of send this millions of Russian, Ukrainian, Belarus, Jewish soldiers, and just try to overcome German Nazi was just blood and millions of dead corpse. So this is again happening on the same in the same territory in the same regions, and this is again Russian tactic. So this just leads me to the point that we are all preparing for the worst. We are all preparing that all of us at some point, if not tomorrow or next month or next half a year will be drafted for in different roles, because it's just a matter of calculation. We Ukrainians are ending sooner than Russians. We are only 35 million by now, and Russians are 170 something million, right? So it's not very comparable. And that leads me to my last point on the war itself, is that for us, the only way to survive, and for us, the only way to survive is to win, right? And the only way to win is to win next year and to have a complete victory. Complete victory means that all Russian forces have to retrieve from Ukrainian territory, including Crimea. In other case, this will be an endless war that we will, and if it lasts for years, we will definitely lose it. And then it will be situation, if you can imagine, like living to Hitler occupied Denmark or occupied Netherlands or occupied Norway, that would be the same story. So having said that, I am really grateful to the to your administration and your bilateral support from the both parties that you have provided to us the Patriot anti-missile system, because only system that can protect us from ballistic missiles. Ballistic is something that you cannot shut down with regular anti-missile weapons. Ballistic is something that reaches where I am in roughly 3 minutes from Belarus. It already happened during the last few days. And just today, just an hour, I think, before this meeting, President Biden announced that the US will provide the Abrams tanks and Germany will provide new German tanks as well. And for us, it means that we have a hope and a chance to have a huge counterattack in spring and to finish this war in 2023. But this war will only be over when there is not just peace, but when there is justice and peace. Because without justice, we will, we will have the same war but maybe in 5 to 10 years time. And a few words on what I do. So last year, the part of 2021 and a few months of 2022, I've been in Nashville. I was on incredible fellowship with Vanderbilt, but then I had to return home because of the war. But since my return here, since Ukrainian forces liberated the north, I've been trying to help Ukrainian communities, Ukrainian regions and schools to recover access to education. We have, together with the team, established a charitable foundation called Saved. And our mission is to consciously and very deliberately, out of 14,000 that we had before the war, are very seriously damaged. 400 are completely gone after bombing. So for Russia, it's a very ideological war. And for me, my team, and for a lot of people here in Ukraine, it's ideological mission to get back our kids to educational activities that are in shelters. So we are not only trying to renew schools where it is possible, but we also arrange shelters so that they are accessible for learning, where kids can safely stay. We are helping them to recover mentally by setting up mental health programs. We are trying to help recently deoccupied territories with the basic and urgent needs that they might have, but also by helping to provide distance learning, because usually when Russians leave, that means that they also steal everything from people. They rob everything they see around. So laptops and all sorts of equipment that people and kids might have is also gone usually together with Russians. So we try to provide kids with that. Yeah, that's in a nutshell on the situation and on what we do. And I hope you heard me well, because the connection is not very stable.
Thank you, Anna. We heard 99.9% of things. You dropped out a couple times, but we have the complete picture there, and we appreciate you joining us under such austere conditions of power and communications. And we tip our hat to the intrepid Ukrainians who are figuring out how to use all these communication devices to keep the world informed about what's happening there. Your education efforts. I know when we spoke last summer, you were working in Chernihiv in the north of Kyiv. You'd mentioned in some of the recaptured areas. So your education efforts are now extending to the east and south?
Yes, so we are now starting to operate in Mykolaiv, a southern city that is now not shelled like it was for the last 6 months. So after Ukrainian forces liberated Kherson, Russians can no longer hit by artillery Mykolaiv, and it is accessible to people. And so our foundation started its operation there. Unfortunately, there are no schools premises that survived. So we will, the first thing that we will do, and I'm traveling there next week once again, we will look for premises where we can arrange sort of like digital educational centers. This will be equipped premises with learning devices, learning materials, provided tutors where kids could come and have at least a couple of hours per day of learning and socialization. We will also try to help on those territories to the orphanages and institutional schools that still stay there, and there are kids who have no parents and who were left behind and were partially under occupation as well. And apart from that, apart from the south, we're also starting to do similar things in Kharkiv region. And in comparison to the northern parts that suffered only 1 month of, if I may say so, only 1 month of occupation and shell, in these parts, east and south, they have been under those conditions for more than 6 months. So the situation there is much, much dire, and those kids require also much, much more psychological support. So this is what we will also try to bring with us there.
Well, thank you for that update, and we'll talk more in our conversation after we hear from Elena Byrd and Dr. Madeleine Byrd, who are going to be rejoining us on the screen here. And ladies, thank you again for joining us and sharing your story. I will turn it over to you, and I understand that Dr. Byrd will share some photos of your work at the refugee center in Warsaw. So Elena and Madeleine, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Pat. Thank you so much for having us on your program. Anna, we can't even imagine, as we sit here in the comfort of our homes, what it must be like sitting in your car in the freezing cold with no internet essentially at all. So thank you. Madeleine and I are going to just share with the group some slides of our experiences. It'll give you just a little bit of an overview. Madeleine and I went to Poland, when the war first broke out, of course, it was February 24th. We went at the beginning of March, and we went primarily because we felt a real calling. Honestly, I felt a particularly strong connection with Ukrainians, even though they're on the other side of the world in some ways from where I grew up. But I am Cuban, and I had to experience, unfortunately, the Fidel Castro regime, communist regime, and fled Cuba as a refugee with my family. So I understood a little bit about the potential plight anyway of the refugees. I really, neither Madeleine nor I could imagine these experiences or these conditions that we saw. This is the Modelinska Expo that you've been seeing pictures of, which was one of the biggest refugee centers in Poland. It still is. We saw anywhere from 5,000 to 6,000, 7,000. Sometimes people would come on those buses being brought in from the borders, the Ukrainian border with Poland. Of course, the main country that Ukrainians came to after the war was in fact Poland. I guess there were obviously different places that they went to as well, Romania and other countries, but we saw the majority in Poland and Warsaw specifically. So this is
I can just
the
give
refugees.
some of the first couple of pictures, and then my mom will talk about more of our experiences as a whole in a second. But just so you have a picture, because as they say, a picture tells 1,000 words. This is the refugee center that we ended up at. These are just some pictures of some of the rooms in this absolutely enormous warehouse. So there were somehow dozens of rooms like this filled with beds, as you can see. And here are just some kids in the refugee center. And then, as my mom mentioned, so this is just a small, tiny example of some of the refugees who were coming in straight from the border. So these yellow and red buses are the Polish government buses, which would basically go to the border crossing points, and then they'd need to take the refugees somewhere. And so they'd be coming in and out. This is in buses, on these huge buses, just round the clock, no matter what time of day. And when we first went to this center, we were at first asked to help with sorting some supplies. So supplies and just all kinds of things were donated in these huge, huge boxes and just kind of dumped in various places. And these the crates that you can see in the bottom right are actually, those are all full of medical supplies and medicines that have just kind of been brought in from all over the world. And since I am a doctor and have a master's in pharmacology, it just so happened that someone there asked us if we have any experience with medications. And I was like, yes, why I do. And so we ended up assuming the job at first of sorting medications and basically creating a pharmacy for the on point, what they call medical point. So here are some pictures of us. So this is before, those are diapers, but before, and then the process of sorting, and more sorting, some of our methods, more sorting, and then after we created the pharmacy essentially in the medical point. So I just wanted to go through some pictures of that. And there was everything from fentanyl to Xanax and everything just kind of hanging around, which was an interesting experience, especially having worked in the US. And then these are some pictures of the clinic. And then, as you can see, the donations did dwindle over time. Okay, but now back to you.
So as you can imagine, seeing some of those pictures, things were extremely, extremely disorganized. It was an unprecedented time, obviously. There were millions of people coming into the country, and to their credit, the Polish government did a pretty darn good job getting things put together to just be able to house and feed the folks that were coming in. But what we primarily noticed is the fact that there was no system in place at all. There was nobody there that was kind of in charge. So quite honestly, we took it upon ourselves to be in charge because nobody else wanted to assume that role. So as Madeleine showed you with the warehouse filled with medical supplies from all over the world, they had no idea how to accomplish the task of getting all those medical supplies from Spain, from France, from Germany, from England, frankly, the United States didn't have all that much stuff that they sent in that batch anyway, but we noticed, in fact, that the United States was less represented than other places in general, which was a little bit confusing. I'm not really sure how that happened. We never could quite understand why other countries were so well represented and the United States wasn't. But in any case, you can see all the flags from the different countries that were there trying to help. The people checking in, the refugees checking into the center were aided by the UK government, Belgian government, Canadians, Spanish, but no US was there. But in any case, we tried to put ourselves in a position of, being flexible, doing whatever it was that was needed. Fortunately, Madeleine's medical skills in particular were extremely useful. And we did, as she said, put together the medicines from all over the world. And then that sort of evolved into actually working in the medical point itself, which was something like an urgent care, but just a complete and total, the most basic. In fact, that's kind of right next to where, do you have pictures, Madeleine, of the clinic area? Anyway, the medical point was very, very rudimentary. I mean, there was very little kind of infrastructure. In fact, some of the things that were just so incredibly noticeable. Oh, there's a picture. Okay, so that's the little medical point. One of the things that we really had trouble with was just manning the place at all, because there were very limited doctors. They had medics, but very few doctors, certainly in the middle of the night when a lot of the emergencies happened in the middle of the night, and there was nobody there other than most of the time just us. So, and there was that's the entrance to it. There was no way to clean up the mess. They didn't have the most basic supplies, paper towels. I mean, people were pooping and vomiting and peeing and everything all over the place, and we had no way to even get the mess cleaned up because there were no supplies. So we went to the equivalent of Target or Walmart and ran over there and grabbed paper towels and sanitizer and just whatever we could. So in other words, we did things that ranged from sorting pharmaceuticals to buying supplies at the local Target. That was our filing system. As you can see, nothing. I mean, they had no filing system. We had to take all the questionnaires. Well, as you can see, there I am sorting the actual questionnaires, the intake forms.
Intake forms were generally somewhat optional or perceived as optional, and collected just in these paper forms and put in trash bags each day, which was their filing system.
Yes, so there was no system essentially. So we created the best system that we could with the limited resources that we had. We did there's a Ukrainian doctor that came to help for a while. He was there. And that's one of the issues that we had as well. There was no system. As I said, there really was no organized system. So everybody just kind of came together and did the best they could. The Canadians, here we are with the Canadians that came for a while, but the Canadians were great, but they came in rotations of 1 or 2 weeks sometimes. So we were the longest term volunteers there. So we had to teach them everything that we knew, which was, not a whole lot, but we did the best we could. And so we would explain to them how things worked. And there we are with a group of people from other countries and from Poland, there were Afghan refugees that needed help as well, actually. Anyway, and so we basically just all did the best we could, and we tried to structure things so that things would work even when we left. We don't know the current condition of the Modelinska, of this particular expo, but we think that it's still running the way that it more or less was, though the Polish government has now opted out of funding that expo, so it's private donations that are keeping this place going, and we're hoping that that things are still going, because there's great need, as you can imagine, just tremendous need. The refugees come in with everything from, you know, unhealed gunshot wounds, shrapnel wounds, to tuberculosis, to chickenpox, measles, mumps. We saw everything, German measles. We saw every kind of infectious disease, COVID, obviously, just absolutely everything came through. And Madeleine and I were there trying to do the best we could, and she was a doctor, so she could help them to a certain extent. But again, the infrastructure was so minimal. And so, Madeleine, why don't you tell what you saw in the problem with infectious diseases, because that's a worldwide problem that really needs to be addressed. What would you say?
So with infectious diseases, it was a really interesting experience for me, because these kinds of diseases are things that I learned about in medical school and in residency training, but had never seen most things. Like most American trainees have not seen chickenpox. But yes, apparently we have learned that Ukraine has one of the lowest, or it does have the lowest vaccination rate in Europe for just baseline vaccinations. And when I say vaccines, I'm not referring to COVID. And so, and there's a lot of vaccine hesitancy.
Childhood vaccines.
Yes, childhood vaccines, measles, mumps, rubella. And so we actually ended up seeing quite a few cases of chickenpox. There was a major chickenpox outbreak, mumps, and measles. And the scariest part about it to me is like the kids that we saw ended up doing okay. But the scariest part is the potential for resurgence of vaccine preventable diseases, because it doesn't matter what a child is coming into this warehouse with, it's going to spread like wildfire. You see how close together those beds are. There are porta potties for bathroom. It's impossible to keep up, social distance or any of those things. It's just impossible in these conditions. So as soon as one person comes in, everybody gets it. And then we have all of these embassies that are helping people relocate all over the world. And there was really no monitoring of who was sick and who was going where. And so that was something that was scary for us and really eye-opening as far as the importance of giving vaccines. So that was something that we tried to work with actually the US Embassy to get vaccines available at the expo at the medical center. But there are a lot of kind of bureaucratic hoops that you have to jump through. And so we were not able to do that. But that is something in the future that we would love to do, because there's this catch-22. Poland requires that you have vaccinations for the children to enter schools, et cetera. And at the same time, they make it so difficult to get a vaccination over there, because it's required to be given by a physician, while in the United States, we usually have like a medical student can give it to you, or certainly a nurse. Administering a vaccine is something simple. So we noticed a lot of like small, simple gaps that need to be filled, and are still working on how to address some of those things.
That was
Elena, Madeleine, I understand that you're planning to go back to Poland and continue working. Will you be going back to this same facility, or are you going back to another situation?
We had been in actually several different facilities till we finally kind of landed permanently, it seems, in this one, the Modelinska Expo. We will definitely go back to this one. There's some other facilities that are kind of offshoots of this facility, because what the government is trying to do is get people out of these giant refugee centers and have them get into some sort of more permanent housing. There are sort of halfway houses almost, if you can look at it that way. Is some of the people that were in this Modelinska Expo went to a different place, or went to several different places, ones in which we also helped, but this was our primary location. Women and children obviously were the main population, but the other locations did primarily pregnant women and newborns. So there are several locations because there were a lot of pregnant women and there were a lot of newborns. And this giant center, you know, there were these like little tiny babies being exposed, also these constant, as Madeleine was just pointing out, this constant barrage of not just childhood infectious diseases, but every kind of disease, adult diseases, everything was, you know, just kind of scattered around in this giant thing. So they were trying to limit, I think that was one of the objectives, was trying to limit the infectious disease passing rate, the transmission rate, by trying to isolate people more in smaller housing, because of course you can't do that in these giant centers, as Madeleine said. You know, you diagnose somebody with chickenpox and then they just go right back out into the 5,000 strong group.
What was your sense of the scale of the refugee situation? We understand that, and these are out of date numbers, but 3.5 million refugees from Ukraine were landed in Poland alone, and we spoke with the Irish ambassador last week, and 30,000 Ukrainian refugees are in Ireland. So how do we get our arms around the magnitude of the refugee humanitarian situation across Europe stemming from the invasion of Ukraine? Maybe that's not an answerable question, but yeah, did you have a sense when you talked to people there? Was Poland overwhelmed, or were they dealing with things adequately? You know, we see the crowded warehouse, but clearly people were in shelter, they were being fed, and they had medical care. You know, we see refugee situations around the world where refugees are not that fortunate.
Poland was definitely very overwhelmed at the beginning, and it wasn't just like with the refugee centers, but everybody talked about the traffic. Like the city just felt like a different place. Warsaw itself almost doubled in population within a couple of weeks, and they were definitely very overwhelmed in the beginning. And so, because nobody was prepared for this, it's not like there were existing refugee centers for people to come into. It all happened so suddenly, and certainly Europe isn't a place where you would typically think that you would need to be prepared for a situation like this. So they were overwhelmed at first. I think it's gotten better. And the government did a great job responding. Like the first refugee center that we worked at was originally an ice skating rink, and the ice skating rink just became one of those warehouses with beds.
Sure.
I think that it's gotten better, and that the country is more prepared now for incoming people, but at the same time it's tough because kind of international interest is dwindling and people are still coming.
We sense that anyway. Yeah. We don't know that it is, but we had a sense of less interest over time, and certainly things got better, I would say, during the time that we were there, which was about 7 months worth overall. And at the beginning, things were utterly chaotic in the city itself, and the railway station, and, you know, every place was just completely overwhelmed. But I do think that the city did seem to get back to normal probably a few months later, and it seems pretty normal now. When we just left, it seemed relatively normal, but you still go into these giant refugee centers and see lots and lots of people there, thousands of people. So I think they've just gotten better at concealing it, frankly. I'm not sure that it's disappeared, but they've absorbed them a little bit better than they did at the beginning, of course, because they've gotten more accustomed. But I don't know. Anna can probably speak to what's going on in terms of the movement of refugees leaving the country Now we noticed that there were a lot of people going back, but then equal numbers coming back in. So I'm not really sure where it stands now. Maybe
Yeah, I was just
Anna
about
can
to ask
address.
Anna to jump back in and talk to us about the what the refugee flight looks like, months into the war. But first, I want to remind our viewers that this is the In Focus program series, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There are numerous episodes from the series on our website, tnwac.org. This is a public service of the Tennessee World Affairs Council. If you appreciate these kinds of programs, take a look on the website, tnwac.org, to become a member of the council or support us with your donation. Anna, and again, we're talking with Elena Byrd and Dr. Madeleine Byrd and Anna Novosad from her car in Kyiv, braving the cold and the lack of electricity at home. So she's out hunting Wi-Fi and cell connections. Anna, what does it feel like in Kyiv with over 6 million Ukrainians having fled the country, presumably most from the east? You talked about the orphan children in the areas that were reclaimed after the Russians had occupied those territories. What's your sense of the magnitude of the humanitarian situation there regarding refugees?
Well, Ukraine is a large country. It's scale invasion of Russia. We had roughly 40 million people, right? So it's hard to put the same tag on every region. Here in Kyiv, I would say that it still feels like around 30% of people have left, or maybe just a bit more. However, obviously in the rest of the cities that have been either shelled or have been under occupation, the situation is very different. Here in the north, in Chernihiv, it's a large, pretty big city in the north. I would say they had before the war 250,000 people. Now they have roughly 190,000 people. But of course, the war situation is further to the east and to the south. There are a lot of towns, large towns and villages that are just completely void. People have left those either during evacuation periods or after liberation, because those territories are unfortunately not livable, and that situation is caused by so many factors. You probably have seen how many artillery shells and ammunition is fired daily by Russians. It's roughly 60,000. I don't know how you call it, like pieces of ammunition, or like, so the total number is around that.
Rounds.
And all of that, yeah. On lies around in the water, in the rivers, polluting the water, polluting the ground, and that's just very, very dangerous, and it's a really huge ecological challenge. So people just can't stay there. But a lot of people are not traveling abroad, but are just moving around the country, moving towards center, towards western parts, or just at least a little bit further from the very epicenter of horror. I have just returned from Poland, where I was on business purpose, and here I think
Anna,
the situation was
go ahead. Anna, your signal is having a little trouble. I'm going to pass a question from one of our
better,
attendees.
for instance,
And this is for Madeleine and Elena. What was roughly the number of volunteers and medical staff supporting the Expo facility, the Modelinska facility in Warsaw? What was the staff?
I would love to answer that. So I think I forgot to mention, but the general patient or number of residents was usually around 5,000. So there's 5,000 refugees in there. And as far as the medical staff, so there was a medical point technically open 24 hours. As far as employees, maybe one EMS, one doctor technically at a time. And then volunteers, it was super variable. The thing that made it really was nice at times, but also difficult, is sometimes you would go from one doctor to having 15 providers available as some of the volunteer groups came in. And so that was a challenge, because those people, it's great to have so many numbers, but they also were only coming for a week at a time. So we found that difficult, because as soon as they're starting to get to know the system, they're out, and then another group comes in. And so sometimes it would be quite a lot, but typically, for sure, at least 2 people. That's the only thing that I can say for sure, 2 people, and 2 employees. And something that was really highly needed was translators, because Polish people Ukrainians appear to speak much better English than the Polish, in my opinion. And so there's just this huge language barrier. There were, I don't know if there were ever formally paid translators. It was mostly volunteers, but it was a beautiful experience in many ways, because honestly, like a third of the residents of the refugee center would also take on volunteer duties, which was awesome. And so there would be people who were experiencing all of this and then would come put on their little yellow vest and work as a translator, a volunteer translator in the medical center. So a good percentage of the staff was refugees themselves.
Yeah,
Anna,
that's true, actually. Go
ahead,
ahead,
Elena.
sorry. No, I was just going to add to what Madeleine just said. There would be at times loads of people in the middle of the day, but then not a soul in the middle of or after, say, 8 or 9 o'clock at night, which was a huge problem, because that's when a lot of kids seem to want to have their issues, having been a mother myself. And so at 2 o'clock in the morning, there was nobody there except for us. Often that would happen. There wasn't a single solitary soul, except maybe a random translator, as Madeleine said. One of the things that I, in fact, noticed that people probably there needs to be more of a way to explain to people that come in from these large groups, because they know absolutely nothing and they don't know even the most basic terminology or what's going on there. There must be some way, and I don't know, maybe with Anna's educational things or whatever going on, there must be some way to try to at least, for example, identify, as Madeleine was saying, people that speak English within the refugee population. That was an awesome place to go find people that spoke English, translators. That's where you could go find them, but nobody kind of thought of that idea. We finally did think of that idea, but I mean, that would have been a great place to go. Or even medical staff or people with medical knowledge could have been brought in from the actual refugee population to help out or something like that. I mean, there was no way to get that to happen other than we just did our best to try to make stuff like that happen. But I do think that
the biggest issue I felt was like scheduling shifts. There was no scheduling of time when people are going to be there. And then you have the American group, you have the Canadian group, you have the Polish people and the Ukrainian people, and most of them don't speak the same language. And then everything is scheduled on different languages. And if someone can't come in, you just think, oh, well, those other volunteers will be there. So
yeah, I can imagine managing chaos is one of the biggest challenges in those facilities. And Anna, you're back with us. Let me share a couple of questions for you. I'll pass 2 along so you can hop from one to the other. Nick McCall, our Tennessee World Affairs Council member over in Knoxville, he asks if you could characterize the top humanitarian needs in Ukraine that the United States can help with. We see in the news here a lot military shipments and the amount of a budget and so forth. But in practical terms, what sorts of things are needed there in Ukraine that the West can provide and assist with, either governmentally or through private organizations. And feel free to mention also your education work. And I'll mention to our viewers that we will pass additional information on that effort to them after the program is over. But the other piece was Professor Thomas Schwartz, a distinguished historian at Vanderbilt, where you were a fellow. He asks, is there any room for compromise with Russia on its peace demands, or are they completely unacceptable at the present for Ukrainian leaders and Ukrainian people? For example, would there be some agreement to accept a plebiscite in the eastern areas that were under contention and Crimea, for example? So I'll let you, and Lord willing, the cell phone gods will be with us, and you can take those two questions.
Right. So on the thank you, Patrick, and thank you for the questions on the humanitarian needs. So it's still winter in Ukraine. It's pretty cold, and most probably February was going to be worse. And with this electricity outages, generators is something that is just must have, and I would say that's the need number one. Here in Ukraine. It's very hard to buy it here because of the very short supply, and the demand is huge. So all sorts of winterization things, from generators, heaters, blankets, things like that can help people to survive the colds. Then obviously we are all dependent on Elon Musk and his Starlinks, because that's the only thing that during the outages and during the couple of days blackouts keeps us connected to the outer world, even though that's expensive, and Mr. Musk also provides some of them for free to Ukraine. Apart from that, on education side, I would certainly say that we do need quite a lot of learning devices, learning materials, from even the cheapest tablets to all sorts of learning materials and didactics that can keep children occupied and keep keep their access to education. We in SAVED have started a couple of partnerships with the U.S. Schools, regular schools, and some of them high schools, to provide to collect books and ship them, or to collect money and to procure here tablets. So things like that. On the second question, looking retrospectively, would you say that appeasement of Hitler would work, right? Would you ask the question whether there could be any settlement with Hitler? I think it's a fairly easy question to ask if we look into historical retrospective, and there cannot be any compromise with Russia. It has been there for this last 30 years. It has been there since 2014, when Russia occupied Crimea, and the whole world was supportive of that, because the whole world said nothing apart from very lame sanctions. That doesn't mean that there was not our fault that we couldn't protect Crimea in terms of getting it back in an ardent way, but that's the whole different story. So there cannot be any compromise, because if you leave to Putin at least an inch of our territory, there will be another war in 5 years. There will be another war in 3 years once Russia recovers, and once the whole world just forgets about the genocide that is happening to us here every day. So I think the history is the biggest teacher in this whole story. And as I said, this war can only end in peace that is just, right? That there's justice in everything that happens afterwards. And justice means that Russia leaves all of our territories, including Crimea. There are reparations, and there is tribunal over Putin and his and all those who did all this horrible deeds here in Ukraine. So no, I think there cannot be any compromise. And also those people that you mentioned in the east of Ukraine, let's imagine an experiment, right? You put people for by now 9 years into complete informational blackout. You feed them blatant lies and propaganda that Ukrainians are Nazi, that Ukrainians are eating kids for breakfast, that Ukrainians, I don't know, that we kill those who speak Russian. So all those has been fed to these people for 9 years. Of course, they will hate us. Of course, they will want to be with Russia. And of course, if you give them right to vote, they will vote against Ukraine. So you cannot underestimate the power of propaganda, because power of propaganda is what led to this war. Because the entire Russia, and I can say that for sure, because I have unfortunately so many relatives in Moscow, around 15 of that. And those bastards dare to call me and ask why we bomb our cities, why we kill our people, right? Because these people, despite being ethnically Ukrainian, they believe in what they are told over Russian TV. And the same thing happened to people in the east of Ukraine, and the same thing happened to people in Crimea. And once these territories are back, I'm pretty sure that they cannot have a right to vote for next 10 years or next 15 years. And there has to be a strategy of reintegration of these territories, because it's a matter of our political survival state.
Anna, thank you for that. It's a powerful testimony to what's happening in Ukraine and the international situation. We're close to running out of time. What I'd like to do is ask each of you to take about a minute and share your closing comments, your reflections on your experiences, and on behalf of the audience and the Tennessee World Affairs Council. Thanks not just for your insights and perspectives, but for being on the ground, helping as best you can your fellow humans deal with this catastrophe of the making of the Russian government. Elena, and then Madeleine, and then Anna, if you could take a minute each and provide us with your closing comments.
Thanks, Pat. I guess my major closing comment would be, there's just vast humanitarian aid needed, medical aid, just general humanitarian aid. And I would hope that people would respond by trying to get to the right place to give that kind of aid, which is a complicated problem, by the way, too, because there were a lot of sketchy characters over there. You don't know where your money's going sometimes. It's one of the reasons we wanted to be on the ground, because we could see where our money was going. We knew exactly where it was going. And I think that if people could try to put together some sort of a network of reliable sources of information that can tell you where your actual donations are going, that would be incredibly helpful too, because there are a lot of people, these situations bring out the best of humanity and the worst of humanity, sadly. And there are people that do take advantage of the situation, but there is just tremendous need. We need to help. We need to do what we can. We've tried to do what we could, but I would hope that others would step in and try to do what they can as well. That would be that's what I have to say.
It's probably, there's no end in sight from what I can tell. This isn't going to end sometime soon, and there's still going to be displaced people. And so I think actually developing a streamlined organization system is important and beneficial, because this is still happening a year later.
Thanks, Madeleine.
Yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the last thing for me, it was mentioned then when you girls came to Poland, you just saw this huge chaos and someone had to take responsibility, right? I think the same thing happened on the international agenda when this war started, and Ukrainians started to fight back, and no one believed that we could survive at least 3 days. And it was the United States of America who took responsibility on international community to stand against Russia and stand against this horrible war of not only Putin but of the whole Russian people who support it predominantly. So I just want to say thank you for all your support to all people of United States. You cannot even imagine what a huge support and gratitude is here to the United States. And today, right now, probably my friends just texted me, everyone, those tanks being sent to us. And a few weeks ago, we had this Patriot anti-missile system thing. And for us, it's not just, some hype thing. We understand that this is something that will protect each of us every day against someone who wants to come here and just erase us as a nation. I see here a lot of people who are, predominantly I see here only people who are willing to walk as long as they can, and then as long as it's needed, right? So for us, this war is like that. We will fight it back as long as we can, and then as long as it's needed. But we count on the support of those who are sharing our values for freedom and the ability and right to choose ourselves the lives that we want to live, that are free, just, and also democratic. So thank you very much once again, and thank you very much, Nashville. And Nashville, last thing. Tennessee has this motto of being the volunteer state, and I think this is something that we share quite in common with Ukraine, because Ukraine has turned into one huge state as well. Thank you very much for listening to us today.
Anna, Madeleine, Elena, thanks so much for your time today to share these important stories with our audience. And again, we appreciate everything you've done on the ground there. This is our In Focus, Russia Invasion of Ukraine. It's a series that we started a year ago. You can find more from this series on our website, tnwac.org. And while you're there, please take time to become a member of the Tennessee World Affairs Council. We're an all-volunteer organization based here in Nashville, and we appreciate your support as members and your donations to make these programs possible. We'd like to thank our partners, the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce, Belmont University, Pinnacle Financial Partners, and all of our members who support our work. You can find a recording of this broadcast to share with your friends on youtube.com/TNWAC/videos, and also on our tnwac.org website. Please share this program with others. When you are on the YouTube site, please make a comment, give us a thumbs up so we get more people coming to the site and back to our program. So we appreciate it. And as Nick McCall just put in the comments, Slava Ukraini. Anna, you and your countrymen are in the hearts of Americans, and we're proud to be able to do any little part we can to help. Elena and Madeleine, thanks for representing Nashville, the volunteers in such a stunningly successful fashion, and best luck when you go back and continue your work. That's it. I'm Patrick Ryan, president of the Tennessee World Affairs Council. We appreciate you joining us today, and we look forward to upcoming programs that you can find on our website. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.